and Happy New Year. I hope you guys are keeping well. Uh, Welcome to the meeting. Today's meeting is on exams. We do know that we are currently preparing for exams right now. It's about that time of the year. So this session is aimed at ensuring that we effectively answer the questions and that we prepare for the exams effectively. Of course, we all want to graduate, and not just to graduate, but to graduate with the best grades possible. So for this session, our guest is none other than Dr. Kenneth Wyne Mutuma. I know most of us are familiar with Dr. Wyne, but just in case anyone is not, or there's anyone who lives under a rock, Dr. Kenneth Wyne Mutuma is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. He's also the managing partner at Wyne and Associates. He also has a vast experience in governance, ADR. I think most of us know him for ADR, international law and commercial law, including arbitration, mediation, and litigation. He is also a chartered arbitrator, a certified professional mediator, and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. He currently serves as the vice chairperson of the CIAB Kenya and a council member of the Institute of Certified Secretaries. He is a senior lecturer at the University of Nairobi, teaching subjects such as ADR, corporate governance, and international humanitarian law. He has a strong legal background in legal education and training, and he brings a wealth of practical knowledge on exam strategies and answering techniques, drawing from his extensive experience in both academia and professional legal practice. He is also an author, having written many books and articles on topics related to ADR and corporate governance. I could go on and on, but allow me to stop there in the interest of time. And without further ado, welcome our guest. I see we are currently at 36 participants. So before Dr. Wine takes the floor, just a few things to note, a few housekeeping rules. We will have a session for plenary for asking questions right after he speaks. So be sure to note down any questions you may have on exam technique, answering questions effectively, or any other question you may have. We will have an opportunity to ask questions. So without wasting too much time, allow me to now invite Dr. Kenneth Wyne Mutuma to take the floor. We can give him a virtual round of applause using the reactions at the bottom of the screen. Karibu sana daktari.
Thank you very much, Gitonga, and Dorothy. A very good evening to all of you guys. Thank you for the warm welcome. Also that you've shared. I can see the emojis going out. Allow me to see. I'm able to share my screen. I think it's appropriate at this point. Just to confirm that the technical equipment is working. Are you able to see? Oh no, it is disabled. Unfortunately, I can't share my screen. But what I'll do is I will share the PowerPoint afterwards. For some reason, it is disabled. I'll send to all of you the PowerPoint. I think the committee can quickly send it to everyone who is present. I had mentioned that I'll try and keep it short so that we can have greater engagement during the session. I know that you're on the cusp of the exams, and I'm hoping that this will be quite useful before next week, so that everyone who's attended gets value for being a part of this session. So I interpret the task, how to tackle law exams and answer questions effectively, in two main contexts. Pre-exam preparation, which would be about now where we are, and then of course during exams. What happens after is another story. But there are of course other procedural and process related mechanisms that kick in after you've finished the exam. In terms of pre-examination prep, I am hoping maybe just to touch a bit on techniques. That's the technical side of it, but also something that's very, very key for performance in anything that you're being tested: the ability to manage stress. And then, of course, during the exams, we look at different types of law-based questions and the tact in answering those questions, how you analyze them and how you answer them. I think it's also important to discuss common mistakes that happen and that you might want to avoid. So that sort of point, that's something that we see as course instructors and examiners. Students that actually read, but for some reason they don't meet the threshold or they don't perform in a way that correlated to the amount of efforts they put in reading. And some of those common mistakes pointed that. I also believe it's important to be cognizant of many common challenges that you face as students, both during preparation and more specifically during the exams. Mistakes around understanding questions that are being put to you, challenges such as time management, difficulties when it comes to the depth and breadth of your responses. And of course, I talked about pre-exam stress, but the exam itself can affect your hormone levels, induce its own unique stress and anxiety. So we'll probably have a discussion also to reflect on some of that. Now, let's talk a bit about exam preparation techniques. I want you to think about, I had a very good quote that, and quotes sometimes they make you ground your understanding when you're looking at a particular facet. They're quite useful also when you're writing your thesis. Some have used it, of course, also in the exam room. But the quote that I have when you think of your exam preparation techniques is none other from Sun Tzu. In The Art of War, the author says that every battle is won before it's fought. That's the sequence of life. You actually win before you actually get to the battlefield. And that speaks more to presentation and the preparation you put before you actually present. I use the word present because that is essentially what we do in different fields. Whether you're in war, you present your forces. When you're in your exams, you present yourself and your responses. And later on, you'll find the same thing when you get to the work environment. So what are some pointers in this regard? Of course, there is a reason we ask you to attend classes. And it's often said that what you get from being present in an hour, you would need 3 hours to make up in reading. So in class, you've got several aids that are in operation that enable you to assimilate information in a very rich manner. Of course, class attendance itself is no magic bullet. It's assuming that you're doing other things that make class attendance of value, such as pre-reading and post-reading. Individually, you're also part of some kind of study group that you use to sharpen your knowledge, and that you'll be able to consolidate everything you've learned in class with that those study groups and the material that you're reading. So exam preparation is a given assumption that we believe if you're looking for a distinction, you can't avoid those different aspects of preparation. Then I think it's important to speak about the stress that sometimes can work against you. So it's good stress, and of course, there is very negative stress. Essentially, stress was a very important hormone discharger because it gave us this fight or flight mechanisms that were very, very key to survival. I want to ever speak so much more about the bad stress, this the one that immobilizes you, and why it's important to have ways of dealing with it. Of course, the best way to deal with stress is to be objective and ask yourself whether you've done what you're meant to do. That's the first thing, because stress sometimes comes to point you at something that you need to point at, you need to pay attention to. So you would be stressed if you haven't prepared. And the stress would be telling you, about the classes that you've missed and whether you haven't read your personal reading and so forth. So take that as a positive. The problem is when it's there and you did all these things. You were present, you studied, part of groups, you've revised. Then you need to look at other factors of combating that stress. It could mean you've put so much focus, in the words of the old adage, all work and no play, that it's now making you experience negative returns. Remember your economics in high school, the law of diminishing marginal returns. So it is now becoming counterproductive. In that case, you need to distract yourself with other activities, like an athlete does when they rest out from training. There's something that happens in the muscles, and the brain is no exception, that enables you to bounce back. You bounce back like a rubber band or a spring. So find out what is this play that Jack is missing, or Jill, that's making them a dull boy or a dull girl. All work and no play. What are your hobbies? Even now, I hope you are still giving yourself to some of those hobbies. Are you exercising? There is a correlation between physical or physiological part of you and psychological or your intellectual part. And just like everything else, if you're just straining one side, you're finishing that muscle. And then, of course, are you getting enough sleep? Now, it was always glorified if you were able to talk about how many hours of sleep you've gone without in order to achieve a particular task. But I think more and more it's becoming clear that people who don't sleep are actually at a disadvantage when they have to meet up with a severe challenge. Please look at some research that actually show how the lack of sleep is equivalent to some of the impaired um, mental resources that an intoxicated person may have. Others, of course, is your diet. Yeah, this food impacts us in many, many ways. And this is just be cautious about how you eat during this period, and of course during the exam itself. All kinds of things can happen to sabotage your aspiration. Another important stress management approach tool is how you manage your inner resources. Some call them spiritual resources. That core of you that finds serenity, peace, and steals itself. So the idea of prayer and reflection, meditation, and yes, I dare say it, affirmations, speaking to yourself in an encouraging manner. I think it's been proven across that we do respond to the messages that we give ourselves. And then finally, you do need people to deal with stress. This idea of community and conversations. Make sure that you have a rich array of friends around you to commune with, to enjoy humor and commonalities, interests, hobbies. So in that environment, the load is shared and feels much lighter. Now, moving beyond that period of the pre-exam, I think it's important to speak about during the exam. Many things that are key. Remember, I'd mentioned some of those pointers that you need to be aware of, such as your understanding of the questions and your management of time and the kind of responses you give to those questions, the quality of that response vis-a-vis the questions that you've been asked. Let me start with one common pitfall. Many candidates that fail to read and understand the questions. So these two are twin sisters. To read, and that means almost like an editor looks at a manuscript, and to read, to understand. So, of course, if you don't read, you start off with terrible assumptions that can throw you off. And then, of course, you may have read, but have you understood what you've read? What exactly is being examined? That's the first thing. And of course, in every array of facts, there will always be what is useful and what is not useful. That understanding is key to how you are going to structure your answers. If you haven't read and understood, you won't know how, very much like in a conversation, an ongoing conversation, you won't know how to respond to what you're being asked. Then, of course, time management is very, very key during exams. You have to look at the number of questions that you're being asked, the weighting of those questions, weighting as in WEIGHT, how much is allocated to a specific question, and do some calculation that will determine how much time you spend on a question. I would suggest that you calculate so that you have at least 10 to 15 minutes for reviewing the entire exam. Of course, you'll see one of the common pitfalls is the failure to complete. Like any test, whether it's athletics, whether it's in your context, academic, and so forth, if you don't complete, there are disastrous consequences. You're better off finishing the entire exam without everything being perfect than seeking perfection in one or two questions but leaving an entire question undone. Time management is key. Then, of course, within the context of time management, it's important to know which one you will start off. And there are different strategies here. Very often, the one employed is starting off with the easiest questions, the one that you find you are most confident about. But being careful that as you do so, you don't overextend yourself simply because you feel confident about that question. The reason why some use this strategy is because then you can move off the start with a bang and with the benefit or the reward of some kind of feeling that I've got this made. That confidence boost is great. Of course, there are other strategies. Some believe that you start off with the one that is the most weighty. In terms of mark allocation. Others, of course, believe that you start off with the most difficult. And those that are of that view suggest that be preferential because you are fresh at the very beginning and your mental juices are running at optimum. And that if you do the most difficult one towards the end, you might be fatigued and not as creative. So these are different strategies. Adopt the one that you feel is suitable. Those that, of course, that start with the most difficult, towards the end, think that they will be able to undertake the easy questions, even when they're tired towards the end and with quick speed. the choice, of course, depends on each individual. Most importantly, during the exam, you must answer. And this is where many times good students, they've read, they've prepared, but they don't do as well. This is where they falter. They falter when it comes to the quality part. They are failing in getting depth and breadth. They don't know how much to speak and what range of information around the topic to cascade. That, of course, means that you have to be aware of the different type of questions you're asked, and then what is being expected from you when you're responding to those questions. So you will already have come across the short answer questions. Those make short notes on the following, that kind of question. When you meet those short answer questions, use the same brevity that you have been called to use to express yourself through. Use short sentences, highlight key points, because that's what we're looking for without unnecessary details, and structure the length of your answers depending on the marks allocated in the questions. Don't go for a kill, don't overdo your responses when there are very few marks allocated. Then there are the essay questions, and the essay questions, of course, require you to take a different approach, where you may mix something that is moderately short with something that is long in sentence construction. These questions, and many students don't know this, are marked on the assumption that you know how to put the response in a structured manner that introduces what you're about to say and its context, the marks for that, gets into the heart of the meat of the matter, and concludes with some kind of a position. That structure is very important when the reader is looking at your work. Other important aspects include, of course, the clarity in which you've organized the sequence of your thought, what we call the logic, your persuasiveness, and that really calls upon you reaching out to case law, statute, to contemporary illustrations, and the quality of your argument. The quality of your argument assumes you should know both sides of the debate. If you only know one side, you obviously can't say you have a good argument. So very, very key. The quality of your argument, particularly when you're dealing with open book exams, might also mean the kind of references that you're putting on the table and the acknowledgement of those references. Quotations also in these situations can be quite useful. Think about John Greenbaum's quotation in reference to ADRs, that an ounce of mediation is worth a pound of arbitration and a ton of litigation. So your reader immediately sees that statement in support of Article 159 2C of the Constitution, and they're blown away. Essay questions are what you can expect both in the closed and in the open book exam, even though in the open book exam we are molding those essay questions aware that the internet is present and artificial intelligence is also an aid. So we're changing quite a lot so that we force you to actually give us what a practitioner would be expected to produce. Then the third type of questions are the problem or the application questions, problem-based questions. They are facts, or maybe about an armed conflict, maybe about a victim of a particularly gross violation of human rights, maybe about a trade agreement or an environmental related disaster. And you're meant to give a response to those mutating facts. Bear in mind, when you get there, what they call the Iraq rule, IRAC. I speaking to an approach where you identify the issue at hand first. So you look at all the facts, and as you mutate through the facts, look at what each of the sentences scenarios bring out as far as a relevant legal issue. As what is the rule that is applicable in relation to that issue, the relevant law? A, apply that law. Remember, you've identified the law, then apply it to the issue. Formulate an argument as you apply it. And then finally, C, conclude. Tell us after the application, this is what we're left with. Remember, you'll be doing that for a number of issues, and you will be arriving at a different application for them, consolidate or aggregate, and then use that aggregation as your conclusion. Now, to conclude, remember, I had mentioned some of the common mistakes made by students. And I'd like to probably leave you with this, because sometimes we learn best from the pitfalls and the potholes. First is that so many times we answer the wrong questions. Many times. Remember what I said, reading to understand. Many people have left an exam room in horror and tears because they discovered they misread or they misunderstood. Two, using a wrong format. Remember, I spoke about the different types of questions, legal questions, and how you approach them. It's very common for students to use a short question response when dealing with an essay question and vice versa. That can become quite tragic. And then, of course, sadly, and I think we have been helping, the problem of exhausting time on a single question, giving too much attention to only one question. And that, of course, sinks its teeth when you look at how much time you have for the other question. And most unfortunate is that those other questions may well be within your knowledge and your ability to respond. So it just makes you feel a question that you just have miscalculated when it comes to time. And so you don't have the time to demonstrate your knowledge and prowess. So I wanted to leave it there for the moment. Bonagitonga, I think that those are a few remarks from my side. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wine, for that very apt presentation. We really enjoyed listening to you. I see we've really grown in numbers. So for the benefit of those who have joined us, Dr. Wine just gave us a two-step presentation for exam preparation, one on pre-exam technique and some of the things you need to look at, get some hobbies, exercise, get enough sleep, and another one on during the actual exam, doing the exam, and some of the common pitfalls to avoid, including answering the wrong questions and using the wrong format or spending all your time on a single question. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for plenary so that you guys can ask any questions you may have with regards to exam preparation. We will try and take as many questions as possible, but just for good order, we'll do 3 questions at a time so that he'll be able to answer 3 questions and then you can take a batch of 3 more. So just for housekeeping, you can raise your hand if you have a question. I think I could go first. So my question will be about time management. You did speak about how important it is to actually manage your time well when you're taking your exam. And I'm curious as to whether, of course, with application questions, for example, sometimes there's a need to go back to the material and jog your memory a bit. So from where you sit, would you recommend spending time to actually digest the content first before going back to answer the question, or maybe just focusing on the tact and the technique with which you answer and not so much on trying to jog your memory with regards to the content? So that will be the first question. I'll invite Muthoni to go next. And
So
then
a quick response to that, Jonga. Now, the art of an exam is at demonstrating the ability to handle pressure. The reason there is a time restriction is to test that skill. How well, when you get to the work environment, you hear your ability to manage and deal with deadlines. Now, the way you do that is right from the beginning, you jump into the ring. You don't have too much laxity to reflect and think. And a common approach when you are doing that reflection and thinking is to do it on the exam paper itself. So there is if you are doing a closed book exam that you're writing on hard print, a common approach is to quickly sketch rough notes. The reason why that is a very useful strategy is if anything happens, the course instructor will look at those rough notes. However, as you then move from the rough, as it were, draft section of your responses, and you want to make it clear that you have moved away from that to adopt the what now has come later on as your well done essay, your structured essay, um, then you must take the time to cancel uh, that rough section, to take the time to put something across. This rough approach, rough sketch kind of approach also works with online exams, which is, of course, because of technology, becomes even easier because you can quickly delete everything that was there before. So do think about all of those strategies. I hope that helped Gitonga.
Yes, yes, it does. That answers it. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, Lawrence Karaoke,
Karibu
you
sana.
can go next.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Daktari. I hope that I can be heard.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, we
we
can
can
hear
hear
you.
you, Lawrence.
Thank you. So, my question, thank you so much for the presentation so far and a lot of learning and a lot of tips. I wish I had them when I was doing my exams last year, but then I still have more exams to do. So, my question is what differentiates a B response and an A response?
Very good question, Lawrence. Very, very good question. Three main things. And I'll start with some of the most important. Um, your references to legal instruments, the richness, the tapestry of those references. How much can I see statute? Can I see treaties inside your work? Second, your references to jurisprudence cases, court decisions. How much can we see that in your work? How many court decisions are there? Um, this is extremely important because it demonstrates authority. You're in the world of law and specifically the common law system where everything is standing on the doctrine of precedent. And then finally, and certainly not least, the kind of illustrations that you dig your argument in. I say dig because all arguments are standing on philosophy, legal philosophy. So there is various theories, and it all depends on the stage that you are when you're sitting an exam. And two, they also find their life in a lot of contemporary illustrations, things that are happening here and there. Some of those illustrations, you get them from authors, and others you get them from your wide reading, what might be happening around the world and the globe or the country, and you're able to make reference to that. That, I say, Bona Lawrence would immediately make your reader know you are a different kettle of fish. You're not the ordinary student who just reproduces the notes. I hope that helps, Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is really helpful. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I do not. All right. We have one more question from Wendy Koskei. You may go ahead.
Thank you so much, Gitonga and the team for organizing this. And thank you, Dr. Kenneth Wyne, for an informative session. I would like to inquire, you mentioned on bringing out counter arguments in your answer. Could you kindly elaborate more on that? And if you bring out probably a counter argument, if you should give recommendations on the same and how to go about that. Thank you.
Okay. The TAT, Wendy, is what we often call this idea of not falling foul of the straw man's argument. Straw man's argument is essentially putting forward a position at the expense of other viable positions that may exist. You've weakened them, you've made them a straw man so that you don't have an opponent. Now, of course, you're not expected to, as it were, and I think the word you used was counter the main argument that you want to put across, but you're expected to demonstrate to the reader that you are aware of other arguments that may not sit pretty with what you are advancing. And that awareness is what you use as you seek to demolish those other arguments that you've demonstrated exist. So let me use the general areas, debatable areas that exist in law. You are pro-choice and pro-life. You are abolition of the death penalty versus those that insist that it remains. Your questions around very moral sensitive issues like the commercialization of sex workers, questions around the responsibility of the state versus the individual liberties, questions around the public interest and private or privacy, national interest and so forth. So there are many of those tense areas you find in law. When you are answering, don't pretend the others don't exist. Don't talk about an advanced and liberal argument without demonstrating that you are aware of uh, other communal values that would clash with those individual liberties. That awareness will help you even to advance that liberal argument. Don't know whether that makes sense, Wendy. I hope it does.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Sally Rosina, you may unmute and ask your question as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, when you're handling optional questions and you find yourself in a position where you are only confident with one question and you're unsure about the other, so how should you approach answering a question that you don't fully understand?
I think strip the question to its bare minimal elements. Even a question with terminology that is quite intense will have some kind of construction elements inside it. And one one thing that you must be conscious of is that you will get marks for some of those elements that you can respond to. For example, a long question, rather a short question on alternative justice systems. Let me use that as an example. And their advantages. Now, you might not know, they might just say the AJS, and you know AJS is written in brackets, and they tell you it's an alternative justice systems. You surely know something about justice. And even to speak about that itself is worth some second thought from the reader. You also know something about systems. If you look at the history of your learning experience, and learning doesn't only happen in the classroom or the course where you are. You can say something about those systems and rules in which systems operate. And certainly you know something about what is alternative and why in the first case the idea of an alternative pops up. So alternative suggests something else might not serve all purposes. You can say and answer some things. The other thing is, Sally, is there is very little of complex problems that cannot be traced to some kind of simplicity. So, I mean, my other profession is architecture. So we sort of say that when you strip down a tree, you will see the entire structure in a leaf. You may see everything that's at the top of the tree in its roots. So you really read about anything that you're being asked, and you put away the complexity that you arrive at through layers and layers of reading. You will find uh, that it's not as strange as you would think it to be. Um, uh, you're asked about the environment. If you live in the wild, even if you're a simple villager, uh, you can draw analogies about what this environment actually means to you in a day-to-day engagement, and then be able to speak to that in your responses. Does that make sense, Sally?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Perhaps, if you allow me, I could also ask a follow-up to that question. Maybe in an event where you're answering a question that is not sort of in an area of law that is not very settled, are you always required to draw a conclusion at the end of the question? Should you always adopt a position at the end of your answer?
Not necessarily. You might even say why it's difficult to adopt a position and demonstrate that you could, but you wouldn't because of that difficulty. That itself is a response. It also enables the reader to know that you're an active thinker. Remember, one of the skills we're looking for more and more is the skill of critical thinking. So don't feel cajoled and bullied, Tonga, to adopt a position. Now, all I'm saying here, of course, is going to be very different in the real world. And maybe you might want to bring a few elements of the real world to the example. Unfortunately, we are forced sometimes to dance to the music of the master. So you need to know who you are writing for. And we find students that are particularly good at that in their research questions, because you know who your reader is. You sort of tailor make your conclusion to what would sound like music in their ears. I don't know whether that makes sense, Bitonga, but that's what happens also in interviews. When you start being interviewed, you want to know a bit about the organizations that are interviewing you. When they ask you questions, you want to know what they would like to hear. And since you're trying to get a job, you will feed them with what they find pleasant. Don't be an activist at a very early stage of your life. Pass the exam. And know, of course, many times passing means knowing your course instructor and some of what they might find sits well with the manner that they've introduced that subject to you. Yes, Bwana Gitonga, what do you think about that?
I think it's a very interesting answer, and I think it does answer it. and it's definitely a good approach. All right, so
Oh.
I think Dr. will still be available to take a few more questions. So in case you have any question regarding exam preparation, answering technique, this is your chance to ask the question.
Bwana Gitonga, probably allow me to exit at this stage because of another engagement. But I have enjoyed certainly speaking with everyone. It's always a pleasure listening to your questions, and of course, they reveal a very important part of learning, which is you're only as good as the questions that you're asking. Actually, as you move into your life post the university, what matters most is not the answers you give, but the questions that you ask. So thank you, Gitonga. I think if you can allow me to exit at this stage, I will be very grateful.
Yeah.
Because of one or
Yes.
two other engagements.
Yes, Dr. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation and for your time. Unfortunately, with every good thing, time is never quite sufficient, but we've really enjoyed listening to you. We've drawn very valuable insights, and I'm pretty sure they'll be useful in our examinations next week. So thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evening. I think I'll give it to Gracie to make her concluding remarks just before you leave.
Thank you,
And thank you very
Gitonga.
much to all of you. I really wish you the very best. I certainly hope everyone in this platform does well in the exams. Thank you, and have a very good evening.
Thank you for that, Daktari. I think he has left, but on behalf of the University of Nairobi Law Journal and to all the team that came up to convene this session, we'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us and actively participating in this session. Your engagement and thoughtful questions have made this session valuable, and I'm sure it will help you as we approach the upcoming exams. A few tips to remember is that when you're doing your exams, you're not just regurgitating information, but you're bringing out reasoned arguments, looking at both sides of the argument, and don't forget the illustrations from the real life situation. Once more, I'd like to thank you all and bring this session to a close.
Yes, Mr. Kwemoi, I see you asking whether the recording can be shared. I think we have the recording. We'll be able to share it in due time. Dr. has also promised to send the slides he was using, so we'll share them as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.